Hey, what's up guys? Today SCOR is launching the brand new 2030 trail bike, but the existing 4060 isn't going anywhere. So for this dissected episode, we're going to put the bikes head to head across a series of challenges to find out where their strengths and weaknesses lie and help you decide which one is the right for you. So strap in and join us along for the ride. But before we put both of these bikes head to head on the mountain, let's cut to Lisa, the PR manager at SCOR, who's going to give us a little introduction to the brand before we then get into the details of both of the bikes.
Hi, this is Lisa. I am the PR manager of SCOR mountain bikes. If you didn't hear yet about the brand, no worries, we are quite young. We are a group of people that just want to have fun on the trails with our bikes. And this is also how SCOR was born. A few people inside the BMC group decided that there are no bikes that allow us to do the enduro and trail riding they are doing in their free time. So they decided, hey, let's do our own bike and let's make it happen. And this is how SCOR was born.
So it's clear based on what Lisa has said that there's a lot of fun kind of nature in these bikes, that is intended at least. So let's take a look at the details first to figure out exactly how they've tried to put that into their bikes. Beginning with the 2030 here, the new kid on the block. This is a 120mm travel rear end as standard, but it can be boosted to 130 with a longer stroke shock, and it is paired with a 140mm fork up front. All of the SCOR bikes use the same instant center linkage construction or configuration to deliver that rear wheel travel. And unlike a lot of bikes, it has a very low instant center, a very low effective pivot point that gives it a very vertical rear axle. And that's totally to do with the fun nature that they're trying to instill in these bikes, because with a more vertical axle, the wheel kind of moves a little bit more with you as you ride, and you feel a bit more connected, and it generally gives you a more poppy and playful ride, which is exactly what SCOR is trying to offer with their bikes. So the 2030 is designed to be SCOR's fun-loving trail bike, so it is a short travel machine, but they've still given it their kind of general geometry concept with it, with quite long front centers, fairly long reaches, but a really tight rear end. So that equates to a 429mm rear end on the smallest 3 sizes, and in their 5 size range, because they've added an extra size to this, the reaches are all pretty long, with a 477mm reach on this medium large. The head angle up front is 64.5 degrees, but as with the 4060 bikes, you can change the headset orientation to give you a degree steeper head tube, bringing it into 65.5 degrees if you want a slightly more kind of nimble, agile feel overall. And you get a fairly steep effective seat tube angle regardless of the size, but this gets steeper with the larger sizes to keep bigger riders more centered in the bike and prevent them ending up all the way over the rear wheel. So as I mentioned, there are 5 different sizes offered in the 2030, one up from the 4 size small to extra large in the 4060. And what SCOR has done is they found that riders in that sort of 175 to 185 centimeter height bracket, which is where, you know, the vast majority of the riding population lies, were having a kind of tough time deciding if they want to go for a medium or a large bike. So instead, they've decided to offer the best of both worlds, maybe with a medium large, and there's just 20mm increments in between each size. So theoretically, every rider should be able to find the kind of fit that they want for their bike. They also added size-specific chainstays for the 2 biggest sizes, the large and the extra large. So large size grows to 432mm, and then an extra large to 434mm. And they've done that just by moving the bottom bracket forwards in the frame slightly, and then adjusting all the other geometry just in the front triangle, meaning they can save a little bit of cost and make it easier to get replacements of the rear triangle should you have an issue. So overall, certainly the geometry numbers have a very kind of unique bias to them, fairly long and slack out front, fairly tight in the rear, and this is all just to provide a very fun machine, as SCOR intends, that will handle steep terrain equally well as just being poppy and playful in kind of more mellow terrain in the bike park and such. So now that we've found out the geometry, let's move on to the details of the frame and some of the new changes that they made on the 2030. So after having the 4060 in the lineup for 2 years, SCOR has learned a few bits along the way about ways that they could improve their overall frame construction and add extra functionality for their bikes. So for the 2030, it's the first time that they've kind of implemented these changes. The first one being that mud clearance in the rear end of the linkage on the 4060 had proved to be not necessarily a big issue in terms of creating damage or anything like that, but what they'd found is that it was getting stuck within the kind of lower gut of the frame, and it meant that riders had to clean the bike with a lot of pressure down there, and so the pivot bearings were wearing out. So to address these issues, they've kind of handled it by adding 3 different changes which all address the same issue. The first one being they've tried to kind of close out the rear end of the bike, or the linkage area anyway, a little bit more to stop mud getting in the first place. So they've changed the lower link design, they've added a slightly different mud guard to the bike. So this should theoretically keep the mud out better. Then they've opened up the area in front of the linkage to let you get the mud that does manage to get in out easier, so you don't have to blast it quite as hard with a pressure washer. And then third, they've added an extra seal into the pivots so that you should be able to, even if you do really attack it with a pressure washer, the bearing should last a little bit longer. Then the storage locker design has changed a little bit, so the 4060 has the locker down on under the bottom bracket kind of area, which still offers a really neat derailleur hanger, and then you can get a tool or something in there. But it's not the most spacious design, so they decided instead to move the location of it up onto the top tube, which did provide a couple of engineering challenges along the way in terms of keeping the stiffness within the front triangle, but they managed to address that and also offer a much larger port in the down tube, which they then equip with a waterproof bag with inside, so you can store a lot more stuff, snacks, tools, whatever you want in there. And also they changed the locker design so that it sits nice and flush with the frame, and overall it's just a much cleaner execution, which offers a lot more functionality too.
I'm Antoine Liard, I'm French, nearly 50 years of age, and I'm the product manager for SCOR mountain bikes.
So I guess a good place to start would be what kind of led to the development of the new 2030, obviously having the 4060 and a couple of different offerings in existence to start with. What was the sort of driver to?
Yeah, so range expansion was for sure on the menu, and what we wanted to do is look into what could have, first of all, the most appeal to the style of riding we do. We're a very small team. 4060 was Mariano's bike, and this one is more my bike actually. A little bit selfish on that one, but obviously it also crosses up with broad commercial potential. There's a lot of people that do not have very high or steep mountains around, and this type of bike can just do a lot of things. So it's a bike that has a bit 2 sides. One of them is for sure the long days on the saddle, a bit of exploring, but with a little bit of an attitude, let's say. The descents should be kind of shreddy and enjoyable, so you don't put all the attributes of the bike for the joy of climbing. And then on the other side, there is maybe shorter rides, a lot of playful rides on maybe slightly flatter terrain, and you just find every excuse and opportunity to just boot anything. So that's a bit the two sides of that bike.
Do you recommend it or allow people to change wheel size on the bike? Or?
Well, it's a free world. People can do whatever fits them. The bike's designed for a full 29er setup. It's not supposed to be modified. If you do so, then there are some consequences, which BB height will be right at the limit. I mean, it doesn't really bother Josh, but this type of riding he's doing is very specific. Yeah. But yeah, this is a bike that, unlike the 4060, which you can convert to a Mullet setup, this one is meant to be a full 29er.
Cool.
For the 2030, SCOR is coming to market with 3 different builds, from the NX build at $5,300 through to the XO1 build top spec at $9,200. We're testing the middle of the road $7,200 GX build here. All of these builds feature code brakes front and rear to really give you the stopping power that you need, DT Swiss wheel set, and a RockShox suspension package on this one, but the top of the line XO1 build comes with a Fox factory suspension package, just to give you that extra bit of bling, and also the high performance too. Certainly overall the builds are all pretty no nonsense, and kind of strike a nice balance between still being kind of shred a bull, but not being overly portly and unhappy to climb. And you can also, if you want to build it up your own way, you can go for the $3,500 frame set option with a shock, the Fox Factory shock on there, so you can really tailor the build to your own preferences if that's what you want. Now that we've covered the 2030, let's move on to the 4060 and find out what sets the two apart. So while the 2030 goes between 120 or 130 millimeter rear end just by the shock stroke changing, the 4060 instead has a 140 or 160 mil rear end, but this is achieved with not only a shock stroke but also a flip chip. So there's bigger differences between the two modes on the 4060, which give the bike kind of two effective possible characters. And then on the front you get either 150 mil travel on the ST or 170 mil travel like we've got here on the LT. And the 4060 here uses the same instant center linkage design. It's a twin link system with the shock driven off of the lower link, and they share roughly the same kinematics, although SCOR has slightly tweaked them for the 2030 to better work with the shorter travel that it has. Geometry in the 4060 is still definitely with the SCOR mindset of being playful, but still giving you the kind of support for hard charging riding in the especially steeper terrain. So on the 4060 LT here, you've got a choice because of that headset of either a 63.8 or a 65-degree head tube angle. And then the reach numbers are quite long across the board, with the size large that I'm testing here having a 485 millimeter reach. And then that rear end is super short for a bike of this travel at 432 mil. And that's constant across the size range. So yeah, every rider gets to enjoy that short rear end. Then with the seat tube angles also being quite steep, overall you've definitely got a bike that puts you in a fairly nicely centered climbing position, but then is really designed to give you the stability for the steep stuff, but still retain that playfulness thanks to that short rear end. So for the 4060, SCOR is currently offering both either the ST or the LT versions in either the NX build kit or the GX build kit, which are $5,300 or $7,200 respectively, or you can buy the frame and the Flow X2 shock for $3,900. And all of these have now got 4 different colors that you can choose from, 4 brand new colors to the market, which including this red one, all look pretty sweet. So you'll be able to find something that matches your style for sure. So now that we've covered the 2030 and the 4060 details, let's put them head to head and figure out which one's going to be the right choice for you. Now that we've learned all what sets the two bikes apart in terms of SCOR's design, let's start hitting some fun features and seeing how the two feel different. First up, we're going to try and rip some turns as hard as we can. Let's drop in and see how they fare. These turns are sick. Well, 2030 definitely doesn't do bad through there. The 2030 for sure cornered well. How does the 4060 do? Oh yeah. Just a little bit more bite from the tires. Really letting you hook in. Get some grip and rip it. Both are bloody good fun through there. The 2030 is so poppy and playful, easy to get off the ground. I actually feel like you've got to work for your speed a bit harder to start with. Oh! Just slower rolling all around, but not bad at all. So jumping these bikes is one thing, but usually the trail gives you the speed that you need for jumps. How do these bikes fare when you have to generate the speed yourself? We've got a section of rollers just coming up. We're going to start on the first roller with no speed, see how fast we get to the end of them. Let's check it out and see how they compare. No pedaling. 20-30 up first. Oh, and enough speed for the jump. And now for the roller challenge on the 40-60. Can I make that jump at the bottom? No pedaling. Oh. Nope. And I was working there, I swear. So typically before you go down the hill, you first have to climb. So let's put these two bikes head to head, see which one is going to be the best pick to climb up the hill. I think I know which one is going to win this one, and it might just be the 20-30 I've got here. Let's get a time first and then see how they compare. Let's go. Going to try to keep that heart rate below 150-ish. So let's see how we get on. Score 20-30 up first. Let's go. Straight off the line. This thing is so taut and just feels super light and efficient. But it gets pretty steep here. Okay, 20-30 did the climb in 3 minutes 19. Let's see how the 40-60 compares. Let's go and get ourselves up there and see. All right, straight out the gate. Definitely not as sprightly. Oh, feeling I need to mash the pedals, stood up to get the same sort of level of speed and support off the line, but still, once you're seated, spinning away, climbing position is good. Definitely not super lousy climber. And across the line. Well, score 40-60. Went up the climb comfortably, but I think the clock says it all. Such a big difference between the two bikes, and yeah, certainly you feel it as well. Just off the line you feel slower, like you're not accelerating as quickly, and then it's harder to keep yourself at that same kind of high speed as well when you're pedaling, just with the slower rolling tires and slightly less support in that suspension. But still not a terrible climber. Anyway, now that we've done the uphill, let's get on to some downs and have some fun. So perhaps no surprise that the 20-30 won the uphill challenge, but how do they fare on something rough and rugged and raw on the downhill? We've got this black run, this super rooty canyon trail. It's very wet, and we're gonna put them to the test, see how the times compare. It might just be survival in the 20-30, I don't know, but let's drop in and find out. Let's go. Oh God. Wow. God. And there we go. Score 20-30 on the downhill. Woo. Let's see how the 40-60 goes down canyon. Can it beat the 2 minutes 14 of the 20-30? I think I know the answer to this one, but let's find out anyway. Riders, watch your gate. Oh! 40-60 is the more confident bike through here, even if I did get a bit sketchy further back. Well, the clock says it all there. 10 seconds difference, even with a seriously sketchy moment and catching somebody up at the bottom. If there's any way to illustrate the difference in times, the difference in speed through rough and rugged terrain better than that, I don't know. But still, The 2030 for a 120mm bike with a dissector on the front and a recon on the back did pretty damn well, I would say. And by no means is it a slouch when it comes to riding technical stuff. Just, of course, you have to treat it as the trail bike that it is. So that's both of the bikes, the 2030 and the 4060, gone head to head for this dissected episode. And let's talk a little bit about what those results mean when you're actually riding the bike and how it feels. Obviously, you would always expect the 2030 with its shorter travel and lighter overall weight to win the climbing stages, but it is absolutely for sure this is a bike that you would definitely want to be riding for the longer days out on the hill, for the bigger, more extended climbs. It is just considerably more efficient feeling under power, faster rolling. Obviously the tyre spec makes a lot of that difference, but under power especially, the bike does just feel that little bit more taut and agile, and yeah, you get up the hill that little bit quicker and with that little bit more or less energy expend in the process. The 4060 though is by no means a terrible climber. That seated position is nice and upright, and it's still got plenty of support, especially when you're seated, to keep you happy spinning away. But the overall slight increase in weight and the softer rubber in the tyres and the grippier tyres that you would typically fit onto a bike like this do definitely contribute to using a little bit more energy in the process. So certainly the 2030 is going to be the bike that you want to take out for the longest pedally days, but then let's talk about the capability when you get onto descents. By no means is the 2030 a bike that is lacking capability, but with only 120mm travel in the rear end, it'll come as no surprise that it does definitely lose out in the rougher stuff compared to the 4060. And even in the short travel variant of the 4060, it does still just have that little bit more kind of planted character through the roughest stuff. But it's quite impressive actually what SCOR have managed to do with that 2030 and still keeping it feeling nice and stout when you're pushing it hard. So I think almost you could turn that into a mini enduro bike, yeah, to some extent, with some burlier tyres, maybe a bigger front rotor, and it is something that I actually plan to do for the long-term test because, yeah, I've got a feeling that thing's going to be a serious amount of fun to get really rowdy on. But yes, as you'd expect, the 4060 was the faster bike on the descents through the rough stuff, and it's always going to be the case. More stable geometry, the softer and increased amount of travel that it has just all contribute to making it a much faster machine through the roughest stuff, one that you can really just grip it and rip it. And it is, for an enduro bike, quite a nice one. It manages still to retain that playful character that SCOR has always intended. As with the 2030, both of these bikes love to get up on the back wheel and pop and play about, but then when you do try and charge it through the roughest stuff, the 4060 does give you a lot of support and yeah, plenty of kind of terrain ironing ability to keep you charging. Even if it doesn't have the kind of most rearward axle path out there, it still does a fine job. But of course the timing is one thing, but it's not really what SCOR is about. As Lisa said earlier, they're not a bike brand that is focused on, you know, offering the kind of fastest bikes to attack enduro racing or, you know, a cross-country race maybe on the 2030 by any means. They are designed just to provide a really fun time. So let's talk about the fun factor. Absolutely, both of these bikes, like I said, they like to pop and play, and really they have delivered on what SCOR has intended. In their respective categories, they're amongst the most playful bikes that you can get. The 4060 might not be so much of a surprise that it's playful because, you know, within that enduro category, you definitely get bikes on both ends of the spectrum, and with the short rear end and the kind of more vertical axle path, the 4060 is always going to be a more playful bike in its category. But then the 2030, I think, is quite unique in a way in that it has this sort of pedaling platform and just general lightweight of a more cross-country oriented bike, but it's really, really playful. It's almost like a mini slalom bike when you're riding it. The short rear end really just lets you pop and play and manual about everywhere. But then it also manages to get the kind of more light trail feeling or even mini enduro feeling with that kind of longer reach, slacker head tube angle and fairly planted suspension for its 120mm real travel. So overall, that thing has really impressed me so far. It's definitely a really kind of SCOR focused offering, I think, into the trail category, cross-country category, whatever you want to call it, that is really quite impressive. So when we compare, when we tried to charge through the roughest stuff, of course the 4060 was always going to be the bike of choice, but then, you know, when you kind of had for the bigger jumps, the 4060 has your back a little bit more, just a bit more suspension travel to take the edge off the impacts. But then the smaller jumps, you'd always want to be on that 2030 just for that extra pop, the easier maneuverability in the air and just general fun factor. That thing is a serious amount of fun. And yeah, definitely a little kind of mini free ride bike that you can still pedal all day. So then, what rider should choose what kind of bike? The 2030 is absolutely the kind of play-loving XC rider's bike in the SCOR lineup, at least. This thing does pedal super well, and it's still going to give you that kind of mini enduro, mini bike park feeling on the way down that you might want if you're certainly a more playful rider, or just someone who values, rather than going as absolute fast as you can, just kind of popping and playing your way down the trail a little bit more. It's yeah, really impressed me so far, and I'm very excited to take this thing out onto a little bit more of a wide variety of trails for its long-term review, so stay tuned for that one for sure. Now let's talk about the 4060. The 4060 is unsurprisingly the enduro rider's pick, but again, SCOR's bikes all have this same kind of character. It's because of that short rear end, but just because of how they're designed. In general, it does have a much more playful attitude than some of the kind of just pure plow machines that you get in the enduro category these days. So if you're somebody who still loves to go on long pedally days for enduro riding and attack some super steep, gnarly trails, but still wants to approach a trail in the kind of poppy and playful manner when the kind of time calls for it, the 4060 LT especially is absolutely a great choice for that. So then, that has been the SCOR 2030 versus 4060 dissected episode on loamwolf.com. Thank you so much guys for watching, and I hope you've really enjoyed it, and also I hope it's helped you kind of be informed a little bit about both of SCOR's offerings in the mountain bike market. I hope you guys have enjoyed this video, and do give us a like if you have. Leave us a comment, let us know your pick between the two SCOR bikes, and subscribe to the channel to see more awesome content on awesome bikes like the SCOR 2030 and 4060. Thanks for watching, catch you out on the trails.